It's a Thursday morning, and you're welcome to the Economy and Politics Show, where we discuss policy, the economy, investments, and every other issue that impacts the populace as it concerns the socio-economy space in Nigeria and its relations with the international community. Today is October 8, 2020, and we'll be looking at the Central Bank of Nigeria and its interventions in the economy. We all know that the central bank has a key role in monetary policy, tracking the issues around employment and inflation, and also the decisions around monetary policy rate, or what you call the interest rate. But also, it plays some other aspects in the economy. We've seen some interventions, and today we'll be looking at that. With me to have this conversation is Mr. Adesola Borokinni. He's an economist with Proshare Nigeria, and we'll be having him to discuss around this. Good morning, and nice to have you.
Good morning, thanks for having me.
Yes. But before we move on to the conversation, let's give you some updates on the Nigerian economy. Today is a very big day, as we expect that at the joint session of the National Assembly, the President, His Excellency Muhammadu Buhari, GCFR, will be presenting the 2021 appropriation bill. This is itemed as the budget of plans and fiscal plan for next year. And this is in line with driving the January to December cycle for budgeting. Here are some insights into that budget or appropriation bill. Its estimate is 13.08 trillion naira and has some of the following assumptions. The first is that it has the exchange rate assumption of 379 naira to a dollar. It is looking at a growth rate, targeting a growth rate of 3%. In terms of the inflation target, it's around 11.95%, and it's looking at oil production level of 1.86 million barrels per day. In terms of the gas condensate, it's looking at 600,000 barrels per day in terms of the targets. For the crude oil benchmark, it's $40 per barrel. Don't forget that the current budget in line, which is 2020 being implemented, had a revision from the initial one, which was about 10.8 trillion naira, and was revised to 10.5 trillion naira because of the COVID-19 pandemic. This budget is looking at stimulating growth, creating jobs, and restoring Nigeria to the path of growth. So today will be a very big one, as the President is expected to present the budget, or the 2021 appropriation bill, to the joint session of the National Assembly, chaired by Senate President Ahmed Lawan and Vice Chairman, Honorable Speaker of the House of Representatives, Right Honorable Femi Gbajagbamila. Let's look at our current economic indicators in Nigeria. Unemployment is still on the high at 27.1%. The last update we had from the National Bureau of Statistics, second quarter 2020. The inflation rate is still on a high at 13.2%. It's been rising consecutively over the months. The misery index is at 50.5%, while the current growth rate is experienced its first contraction since 2016. It's about minus 6.1%. Experts and analysts are concerned that we are on the verge of a recession by third quarter of 2020. In terms of the monetary policy rate, it's 11.5%. The last monetary policy committee meeting stunned a lot of analysts who expected that there would be a hold, but the Central Bank of Nigeria, through its Monetary Policy Committee, reduced by 100 basis points the monetary policy rate from 12.5% to 11.5%. In terms of investments, the current capital importation report shows that we had about $1.2 billion in terms of what we were able to receive as inflows as at second quarter of 2020. These are some of the key indicators showing how our economy has fared so far, and just shows that need for addressing unemployment, stimulating growth, and also addressing ways we can unlock opportunities to attract more inflows and investments into the economy. We'll now move on to this conversation, but before we do that, let's take a breather, and then we'll return. Mr. Adesola Borokinni, an economist with Proshare, will lead this conversation on the assessment of interventions of the Central Bank of Nigeria in the economy. Welcome back, and let's have this conversation. It is one that is very interesting and still tied into the recent report of Proshare Nigeria's leading financial information hub, where it looked at the recent debates between the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, public advocacy, private and public sector advocacy group, recent perception and thoughts around the economy of Nigeria, and the Central Bank of Nigeria, who also responded, where issues around monetary policy and the approach were highlighted. The report titled NESG Vs CBN, Beyond the Narrative, and looking at expectations and how to realign the economy. Those were the conversations, and it's been broken down into different aspects, and you can get that report by logging on to www.prosharengi.com to read further insights on what has been a well-received report viewed across board from analysts, policymakers, even down to economic students and the general public. It's one report you don't want to miss out on, and today we'll be looking in context at the interventions played by the Central Bank of Nigeria in the economy and how important it is at this time. So nice to have you, Adesola, once again. It's been a while, and how have you been doing?
I'm fine. Thank you very much for having me.
Yes. Now, let's first look at global central banking today. I mean, we are in the midst of what they call a double whammy, the global crude oil price volatility, and of course, the COVID-19 pandemic. We've seen a lot of activities from the Federal Reserve, led by Jerome Powell, Mr. Jerome Powell. We've seen a lot of activities even from the Bank of England, with Mr. Andubeli as the governor. We've seen activities from Bank of Japan with Mr. Kuroda, who has been there for a while now. And of course, down to Africa, there's a Lajo of South Africa, and of course, the Central Bank of Nigeria. What are the trends we're seeing globally now, and how is it shaping the role of the central bank?
Okay, thank you very much again for that question. We should know that the central bank's role in this modern age is evolving. And this can be attributed largely to the COVID-19 pandemic. As we know, the COVID-19 pandemic was a black swan. It was unexpected. And as a result of that, the central banks around the globe have had to evolve policies. Right? They've been faced with so many challenges, and they've had to come up with some unconventional policies. Right? And for central banks to come up with policies, most often than not, what they do is you have to check, you have to investigate the peculiarity of the economy, the structure of the economy, right? So you discover that the policies by various central banks, though you can say may follow some particular trend, right? But it's unique to each country. For example, the U.S. Federal Reserve, that's the central bank in the U.S. The most recent meeting, they decided to maintain their rates between the interest rate between 0 to 0.25%, and they decided to maintain their inflation target at 2%. And you should discover that for the US, it's peculiar to them. Why? Because presently the inflation rate is quite low. You can't compare this to African nations that have high rate of inflation. Aside that, also another peculiar nation is Japan. As we know, the Japanese economy, the structure is such a way that most of the Japanese, right, they are aging. They have aging population. Exactly, they have an high aging population. And aside that, also their major contributor to their growth GDP is their exports. So at this period in time, their interest rate is negative interest rate. So what they did basically is this negative interest rate. They are quite constrained in that area. So what they've tried to do basically is they set up an emergency scheme. And what the emergency scheme basically was to do is to provide funds, right, to banks to be able to provide interest-free loans to households, not just households, businesses,
enterprises
that require these funds. They're coming down to the African economy. I'll start from the South African economy. Presently, South African economy has the largest number of cases, COVID-19 cases. And we should know that
they're in the top 7.
And they also had the largest contraction. They contracted by about 51.2% in Q2 2020. So what the government has had to do in South Africa was to reduce the repo rate, right, in South Africa, and they reduced it by 300 basis points. Basically, it was done to boost liquidity. Now, trickling down to the Nigerian economy, one thing peculiar about the Nigerian economy is the quadrilemma.
Which we'll still discuss, but it's okay.
So for me, this has shaping the way our central bank has intervened in terms of trying to rebound or boost the Nigerian economy. Presently, Nigeria has a very high inflation rate of 13.22%. Its food inflation is as high as 16%. Unemployment 27.1%. It also has foreign exchange reserve issues. And aside that also, when you talk about the growth rate, you know that our growth rate contracted by minus 6.1%. So definitely you find out that the CBN has, for me, has been pushed to the wall in the sense that they are constrained in as much as what policy should we embark upon, right? There's a traditional economics theory that talks about Phillips curve. Normally, you expect a normal climb, the base scenario in such a way that there should be a trade-off between your unemployment rate and inflation rate, right? When the CBN, it's expected that when monetary policy is being embarked on, either one takes place in terms of positivity, right? It's, when you improve inflation rate, definitely you are expecting a reduction in unemployment rate or an increase in the but the other case might be the but the situation
fight it.
Yeah, you can see presently that
we're on a high unemployment
rate and high inflation rate. So for me, I see this as the reason why, which might not necessarily be justified, why we've seen the CBN intervene or we see an intertwine between CBN's traditional monetary policies coming in line with fiscal policies, which there's currently been a debate on. Is it justified for the CBN to unify its monetary policy presently with its fiscal policy? So these are issues that was raised up in the report.
Yeah, you just raised one fundamental issue about unifying the rates and all that, which of course has been a concern raised by the international multilateral institutions, which we'll look at subsequently. But let's look around developmental banking today. Developmental banking is very critical to understand, because there's a school of thought that feels that the central bank should focus more on monetary policy. There's a school of thought that also feels that it can play its role also in supporting developmental aspects of the economy. And there's another one that feels that it depends. I mean, for example, if you compare to US, they say US is already a developed economy. So there are not issues that the Federal Reserve want to intervene in terms of sectors and all that. What are your thoughts around developmental banking and what the central bank of Nigeria has been doing so far?
Okay, that's a very good question. The Act establishing CBN, like Section 31 of the CBN Act, grants central bank to embark or to engage in some developmental roles within the ambience of the Act. But accordingly in Proshare, we've come up with what we feel it gives a more explanation to what we can see the CBN doing. We call it fixed mon.
Fixed mon.
Yeah, so
that's fiscal
and monetary policy.
Okay.
And for us at Proshare, it's not really out of place for the CBN, right, to perform some developmental rules. But for us, there has to be issues as regards proper monitoring. For example, the anchor borrowers scheme. Does the CBN have enough capacity to be able to monitor and to ensure proper effectiveness of such policy?
Okay, beyond releasing the funds.
Yes. How do they monitor the effectiveness? How effective have that policy been? And for us, we feel these roles could be assumed or could be performed by other banks, other specialized banks, such as the Bank of Industry and other development banks
Bank of Nigeria,
in Nigeria. So for we feel the CBN is overreaching, right? And instead, it should concentrate on coming up with something unconventional to battle Nigeria's high rate of inflation and contraction in its GDP.
Unconventional. When you hear this word unconventional, we take to history the likes of Bernanke of US is known for taking some conventional measures and rules. But we will come to that. Now, when we look at the current flow and operations of the central bank, like you said, you've given different climes, which is very nice. You talked about the US targeting inflation and unemployment because of COVID rose, and then the inflation is still targeted around 2%. South Africa is really going through its own economic challenge. Japan, negative interest rate and trying to stabilize the economy with an aging population. In Nigeria, according to this report, which I describe as a very incisive and very well-received report, you highlighted the debt trilemma, but prior to this interview, you now expanded it to a quadrilemma. I'd like you to speak to that quadrilemma and how it's going to shape a lot of activities around the Central Bank of Nigeria and its capacity in supporting economic growth.
It's quite unfortunate that presently we're just faced with those 4 issues concurrently, simultaneously occurring.
Yeah.
But what can the central bank do? I feel that's the interpretation of your question.
Yeah.
For me, the recent MPC, in which our monetary policy rate was brought down from 12.5% to 11.5%. I feel for me, yeah, that's 100 basis points. I feel for me that's a step in the right direction, right? And at this moment, it won't be proper, right, for the CBN to work in isolation, because if you can see, I don't. Although for me, I feel the 11.5% is a step in the right economy, right? Given this period.
Scales and different economic.
Yeah, so for basically, we've agreed that Nigeria does what Nigeria calls agriculture basically is a role of farming. So how can we
agribusiness, agri-processing?
So we need processing. We need to add values, right? Not just that the telecommunication sector, the technology, the world is going digital. Hub of Africa. Yeah. So for me, I feel there are opportunities despite this COVID-19, and I feel like I've earlier said, the CBN and the fiscal policy makers, we have to come hand in hand and review and rethink, reimagine and the Nigerian economy in its totality.
Reimagine the economy. Charter Institute of Bankers of Nigeria conference, CIBN, which was looking at sustainable financing sustainability in Nigeria. He mentioned, just like you said, that agric, ICT, and even down to infrastructure finance are those areas that the banking and financial services industry can look at to support, that can unlock growth for the economy. Yeah. So definitely, but beyond the financial services and the banking, you're saying that the fiscal policy should be able to accommodate that. And when you look at the economic sustainability plan, which I guess you've looked around, do you see that fiscal understanding that can help support this monetary system?
What interests me about both fiscal policymakers and the monetary is like I don't see a coordination. I don't see a proper coordination between the policymakers and the stakeholders.
In terms of signaling and then alignment.
Yeah, okay. For example, we know that the CBN, I think sometime around June or so, I'm not so sure, they announced, they directed all authorized dealers to ban, to stop issuing from hemp for the importation of maize. Yes. But we could see that there was an outcry by not just the farmers of maize, but poultry farmers saying this policy at this moment in time was uncalled for. It was definitely going to increase poultry feeds, poultry products, and it was uncalled for at the moment in time. Also, we could also see the case whereby the CBN was trying to prevent arbitrage and round tripping, whereby they issued another directive. Yes, that trying to scrap agents and third parties in transactions. So we could see that, according, for example, that the LCCI, that the Lagos Chamber of Commerce, they came down and they said, no, this policy at this moment in time is not needed. And what it was going to do at this moment in COVID-19 was it was going to further harm the business. And they said that
especially manufacturing.
Exactly. At this moment in time, what they complained about basically was at this moment most of those they deal with, right? What they do was to give them discount on some of what they purchase, and they don't feel the manufacturers who want to give them those discounts. And this might hurt their business and affect their productivity and also increase their cost. So most times you see a disconnect between the CBN's policy and the relevant stakeholders in such industry, and you ask yourself, how did the CBN come up with such policies at the time? Wasn't those stakeholders, weren't they involved in the process of making such policies? So for me, it's a big question. When the CBN makes policies, or when it wants to make policies, it should draw up a plan. In economics, what we call best benefit cost analysis. What are the long-term effects of this policy? What are the short-term effects of this policy? Who are the major beneficiaries of this policy? What is the cost of this policy? What is the multiplier effect of this policy? What are the costs, like I've mentioned, not just to the relevant stakeholders? What is the cost to the overall economy? What is the cost in terms of the foreign reserves? What's the cost? How much does it take from our foreign reserves? Definitely. What are the benefits to our foreign reserves? So for me, these are pivotal questions that the CBN needs to address before issuing policy directives.
Definitely. I mean, you've just said something very apt, because we remember that when the Obama administration took over, they had to lead a recovery. And we saw there was a synergy between Ben Bernanke as the chairman of the Fed in terms of the policies, the monetary policies and the fiscal policies of the Obama administration then looking at recovery. So they were working together to see that the economy is recovering and jobs are on board. Same thing happened in the UK when David Cameron was the Prime Minister alongside the former central bank, Bank of England governor, that was Mark Carney. So definitely it's important for that synergy, understanding in terms of fiscal monetary policy to work together. And hopefully authorities are getting this clear. And I've noticed something additional. Every time you watch the MPC, the central bank governor keeps emphasizing fiscal policy should, its actions are very important. And so that communication is very important. That synergy is very important, and I hope it will improve going forward. But let's go into the interventions. There are several. I mean, the central bank has really, talk about development banking, we've seen a lot from the central bank. And commentators, analysts have said that part of this reason was because in 2015, one policy strategist described it as there was a decommissioning of the economy when the current administration took over. No fiscal step was taken for like 4, 5, 6 months. So the central bank cannot be left in a vacuum. They have to take some steps, and that was what led to these various things we're seeing. But we've seen some efforts like interventions in aviation. We've seen creative industry. We've seen down to MSMEs, several levels, and even encouraging the banks to lend more, even increasing the loan-to-deposit ratio, which is around 60% now. But let's drill down to the Anchor Borrowers Program and even the aviation. Okay. What have you seen in terms of that strategy? Is it showing that reality of a very good systemic approach that can be multiplied going forward? Or is this something that has to be reviewed again and, like you said, monitoring and other mechanisms are put in place?
Okay, that's a very good question. As we know, there's no nation that can progress without producing. Productivity,
yes, productivity is very
key
yeah.
and it's very vital. And aside that, also one key issue also is backward integration, which is also key.
Backward integration has really helped in the cement industry, and definitely can do more.
So the reason for mentioning this basically is as regards CBN's intervention. Now for me, CBN's intervention, though well-meaning, it means well, aside, if not for the CBN's intervention, things could have been worse than they have. Yeah. But like we said, for me, for us in Proshare, we feel like CBN is overreaching. CBN is overreaching its functions. Like I said, they are development banks. They are commercial banks that are better specialized to perform this. Although when CBN started the Anchor Borrowers program, we could see some effects of it, right? But according to our analysis, we feel the program could have been better if it was handled by either a development bank or a bank of industry or something, a specialized bank that could have handled it at that moment in time. And we identified some challenges of the Anchor Borrowers program. We identified issues as poor farmers identification, poor infrastructures, whether you like it or not, no matter the funds you give. If the proper infrastructures are not put in place, proper road, proper storage,
logistics and storage,
exactly,
even two of those major issues.
So no matter the funds you give the people or you give these farmers, if a conducive environment is not given for their produce to thrive, what is the essence of giving funds to farmers when they are not educated about the best practices as regards farming?
Where that's the role of the what you call the agri-extension
These are key issues.
To empower more of them to reach out to the farmers.
These are key issues when it comes to such programs. Yeah. These are key issues that needs to be addressed. Are these farmers educated? Do these farmers know when to expect flood? What do these farmers know about irrigation? Like I said, what do these farmers know? What tools, what implements are they using? So it's not about the program. It's about the whole emphasis, the whole core of farming, of agriculture. Right? So for me, for us in Proshare, if we want to transform the agricultural sector, if we want to make Nigeria an industrial hub, if we want to increase food security, we have to rethink most of these programs, right?
Rethink and reimagine them. That's the key.
Exactly. Another key issue we mentioned, for example, we said, oh, it's absolutely not just unfair to say, oh, CBN's intervention on the Anchored Brewers program has been flawed. We know the current issues, not just the Anchored Brewers program, of all this intervention. We know the current issues. Nobody expected the COVID-19. It was a black swan. So we can see, for example, the lockdown, we could see that this also has also hindered the effectivity, or the effectiveness rather, of some of CBN's intervention programs. Yeah, and like we said, proper identification. How do we know that this? How do we know? I understand that. Oh, maybe probably you don't want to give this. You don't want this guy to bring collateral. But how do we know that these funds are used judiciously? Are there proper system to check that?
Especially the role of the middlemen over the years, which has been described.
Yeah, so there are a whole lot of challenges as regards CBN's intervention.
So definitely have to rethink the whole processes and steps. Now, as we ramp up, let's look at clarity on monetary policy and particularly the foreign exchange management and the approach in terms of ensuring that this is stability in that area, they stabilize. And sometimes you're limited because of the fiscal policy. With all due respect to them, sometimes they are always coming late to the party in terms of that direction that is needed for monetary policy to follow. So going forward, what would you like to see happen in terms of the approach? And some stakeholders want more clarity in monetary policy, like the NESG stated, transparency in how foreign exchange management is done, and moving forward, directions that signaling that can really make a economy receive the required investment, liquidity, and activities it deserves.
Okay, first, my advice, I feel CBN should focus on its core mandates, and its core mandate is price stability and economic growth. Now, aside that also, CBN also has to communicate effectively to the public as regards its strategies, right? We should know that no matter what the CBN does, these are palliatives as regards the foreign exchange. If issues of productivity are not addressed as and when due, no matter the sales of FX to BDCs if productivity issues, if it is not properly addressed, we're only providing temporary solutions to these issues. So for me, I think it's key at this moment in time for the issue of productivity to be addressed. And for it to be addressed, there has to be proper alignment or proper communication between the fiscal policy makers and the monetary policy makers also. Now, aside that again, what's also key for us also is relevant stakeholders. How well does the CBN involve key people that are involved in such industry? For example, like we mentioned, the maize industry. We also, that's under agriculture. We also mentioned the case of the FX, the banning of third parties. With what we saw, there was no involvement of the LCCI with its issue directive after CBN issued that directive. Also, aside that, also CBN has to identify the fact that Nigeria's economy is peculiar, right? It's different. Its structure is different. Its structure is unique. So we have to come up with a conventional policy that can.
A good way to ramp up this. Thank you very much, Mr. Adesola Borokinni, Economist with Proshare Nigeria, for this interesting conversation around assessment of the interventions of the Central Bank of Nigeria in the economy. Indeed, you've clearly said it, the fixed MON, which is fiscal and monetary policy alignment, is very important. Communication and engagement to see that what monetary is doing and what fiscal is doing aligns for driving productivity in the economy. And most importantly, you've got the issue of the unconventional. That means thinking in an unconventional manner how we can really stimulate activities in the economy, and also the need to ensure that it's systemic in terms of the interventions, and that their monitoring mechanisms and other factors are taken into consideration. And lastly, you made very important points. Before statements are made or policies from the CBN, relevant stakeholders should be engaged to ensure that when it's issued, it is something that is embraced across board. And definitely, these are ways we can really move our economy forward. Thank you once again, and hope to have you subsequently.
Thank you for having me.
This program. Yes. And that will be all for this edition of the Economy and Politics Show. Like I said earlier, you can log on to our website, www.prochange.com, to read our reports, latest reports around the debate between the NESG and the Central Bank of Nigeria, NESG and CBN, on the directions of the economy. This is a very robust 71-page report, which when you read, it will give you deeper insight into how both institutions view approach to the economy and what Proshare feels is the way forward and the steps that both institutions should take, and most importantly, where economy should be heading to. And also, you can send your comments and views concerning this interview and conversation to news@proshange.com. We will look at it, what you think about the Central Bank of Nigeria interventions so far and what approach you would like to see going forward. We would look at it and, of course, respond appropriately. Don't forget, by 10 a.m., we'll have an interesting conversation and a market review where we look at developments in the financial and capital market as it relates to the economy. Till we come your way again, thank you for watching. Have a nice day and stay safe.